Hi everyone. So today I did my lesson on turning points and developing events along with adverbs. So my name is Chelsea Myers. My grade level is 3rd grade. My mentor teacher is Dorothy Berry. My university supervisor is Marcia Rice. And the English language arts is the subject for this lesson. The unit learning segment title is Turning Point, Developing Events, and then the lesson title is Turning Points. This is the first lesson of 2, and it is supposed to be about 60 minutes long. It was completed on the 29th of January. So the central focus for this lesson is composition. So that means that students will identify the turning points, developing events, and adverbs in the storybook After the Fall, How Humpty Dumpty Got Back Up Again. The purpose of this unit is to teach students how to identify these different elements within a text and use them to determine the turning point in a text. The essential literacy strategy is writing a narrative, and the related skill is developing events. So the real world connection is asking us, how is this learning segment and the learning goal relevant to the students' lives? I wrote that the learning segment is relevant to students' lives because it teaches them how to identify the turning point in a story, which can not only benefit them in higher grade levels as they come into harder writing classes, but also in real life situations. So when students face a situation where they need to figure out where a situation has a climax, having knowledge in turning points can be critical in this instance. This can even relate into their history classes dealing with wars and battles, and the turning points in that as well. So the content standards I chose for literacy was establish a situation and introduce a narrator and or characters, and organize an event sequence that unfolds naturally. The language standard I chose was explain the function of nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs in general, and their functions in particular sentences. The first objective for this lesson says by the end of class, students will be able to identify at least one turning point and one adverb in the story of After the Fall, How Humpty Dumpty Got Back Up Again. So, the academic language used, going into the language function, the word would be identify, because as you saw in the learning objective, students are identifying at least one turning point and one adverb. The lesson-specific vocabulary is going to be adverb and turning point. The instructional resources and materials students will use will be a pencil, a clipboard, notebook paper, a highlighter, and then, of course, the book After the Fall, How Humpty Dumpty Got Back Up Again. The technology integration will be using the dot camera to project the book onto the smartboard so students can see, and that's again why I listed the smartboard. They'll also watch a video on relative adverbs and the turning point in a situation, a story, or events. So the disciplinary, discourse, and syntax will have students answering the questions, a turning point is, they'll fill in the blank, the definition, an adverb is, they'll fill in the blank or the definition, and then they'll say an adverb is different from an adjective because, and that will be provided to the students in the lesson, so they'll be able to fill that blank in and understand that answer fully. And then the last one is an adverb comes either before the noun, after the noun. They'll have to decide that themselves as they learn. So the assessment that will take place is students will identify at least one turning point and one adverb in the story of After the Fall, How Humpty Dumpty Got Back Up Again. The differentiation and extension for English language learners, I will have them do a picture walk through the book up to the point that we stop in the book, whole group as an entire class, and they'll have a partner with them to go through the book and help them to identify the first turning point in a story. This should be very helpful because we'll have a student who's reading the book, who's their partner, and then they will be doing a picture walk. And so it'll be interesting to see the different perspectives that the students have based on reading versus just visually taking in the content. So the launch of the first lesson, I will introduce to the students the definition of the term turning point. From our Craft Moves book, it's defined as turning or pivot points that are those defining moments when something of great significance happens to the main character or when she or he has an epiphany. A turning point often moves the story forward in that this is often a time when the main character changes in a significant way. Going back to Humpty Dumpty, there's multiple different turning points throughout the book, and it really emphasizes his character throughout. Then students will watch a video about what a turning point is, and I have the link established right there for them. And it kind of goes into more so of a history side of a turning point, but it still gives them a different perspective, especially for our kids who are very literal. So I felt like that would be very helpful to them. I will read the story After the Fall, How Humpty Dumpty Got Back Up Again to students until the first turning point in the story, and that's where I'll stop, so they'll be following along with me in their own books, but I'll also have my own book projected onto the smart board for especially my English language learners so that they can follow along, as well as any other students. I will then explain to students once more what a turning point in a story is, so they'll have had the definition initially, we'll have read the book to that first turning point, and then I will go over the definition once more, and then I'll give them a few minutes to think, pair, share about what they think a turning point is and why. We'll bring it back, and then we'll discuss this as a class of what the actual turning point is and why it is after we go over the students' opinions of what it is, and then move into adverbs. I will explain to students that adverbs can help advance our writing. Students will end up focusing on the phrase, I use words why, where, and when to link additional information. So their invitation to notice this will be through the sentence from the book, I was so scared that it kept me from enjoying some of my favorite things. I would then have them discuss that for some time, and I would explain that an adverb is used before a noun, where an adjective is followed by a noun, to try to kind of bridge that discrepancy between the two for my students. And then for my closure, I would have students then write what they thought the turning point in the book was, even though we've gone over it, just to kind of re-emphasize, along with one adverb from the book. So it doesn't have to be an adverb that we talked about as a class. It could be one that they had read in the story that wasn't shared. And then I will prep the students by explaining that tomorrow's lesson will go into more depth on turning points and how they connect to adverbs. Moving on to the next lesson. Again, this is lesson 2 of 2. It will be the same duration and length, 60 minutes, and it'll be given on, or it was given, sorry, on the 30th. And again, the lesson segment title is Turning Point Developing Events. The lesson title is Turning Point, and then this is an English language arts lesson. The central focus is the same. The real-world connection is the same. The standards are the same, and then the objective has changed. So it will say, by the end of class, students will be able to identify at least 2 turning points and 2 adverbs in the story. After the fall, how Humpty Dumpty got back up again. So instead of the original objective in the first lesson where they just were doing one, now they're doing multiple, and I'll get into that in a sec. The language functions still identify, the vocabulary is still adverb and turning point, and the resources are still the same. They will have the storybook, their highlighter, their notebook, their clipboard, their pencil, and then again the story will be projected on the document camera and the smart board. The disciplinary discourse and syntax will be the same. They'll still be answering those same questions. The assessment, again, students will identify this time at least 2 turning points and 2 adverbs in the story. After the fall, how Humpty Dumpty got back up again. For English language learners, again, they'll do a picture walk throughout the book, except this time they'll go through the entirety of the book, not just to the first turning point. So I'll reintroduce in this lesson to the students a definition of the term turning point. and explain that those are defining moments when something is of great significance that happens to the main character when he or she has an epiphany. We'll kind of talk a little bit about if the character so far has had an epiphany or a turning point and what that has looked like. I'll explain that a turning point often moves the story forward, and that is often a time when the main character changes in a significant way. The treat for the students this round of the lesson is that the story really does take a huge turning point at the end, so they'll be able to see that significant change in the character from the beginning versus the end. So I'll start the story in the lesson from the beginning, and I'll read completely through just to give the kids a refresher from yesterday. I'll have the students again think, pair, share on what part of the story displays the second turning point and why they identified that particular part of the story as that turning point. I will explain to students once more that an adverb comes before a noun while an adjective comes after a noun. I will then pause the book for a little bit and have the students watch a video on relative verbs, and then we'll explain how turning points connect to adverbs through developing events. I will use the two sentences from the book to compare and contrast with an emphasis on adverbs. So the first sentence is, I almost walked away again. The second sentence is, but the higher I got, the more nervous I felt. And I will actually add a third sentence of, I didn't want to admit it, but I was terrified. The adverb's job tells us why he was feeling the way he was. And then I will have my students read through the book once more and identify at least 2 turning points and 2 adverbs in the story after the fall, how Humpty Dumpty got back up again. And that will be the end of my lesson. Thank you.